In the vast concrete landscape of New York City, where millions of stories intersect and fade, there are some narratives that refuse to be forgotten. Stories that echo through time, reverberating with a truth so profound it fundamentally transforms how we understand human vulnerability. This is the story of Elisa Izquierdo, a name that would become synonymous with a watershed moment in child protection, a case so extraordinary that it would force an entire city, an entire system, to confront its most devastating failures. The year was 1989. New York City pulsed with its characteristic energy, a metropolis of dreams, ambition, and stark contrasts. But beneath the glittering skyline and the relentless rhythm of urban life, a family drama was unfolding. A story that would begin with extraordinary promise and end in a tragedy that would shake the foundations of child welfare. Gustavo Izquierdo was not just another father. He was a visionary, a man whose dedication to his daughter would become legendary. A Cuban immigrant who had carved out a life of remarkable achievement, Gustavo saw in his daughter Elisa not just a child, but a beacon of potential so bright it caught the attention of royalty itself. Yes, royalty. Prince Michael of Greece had personally sponsored Elisa's scholarship, a testament to the extraordinary intelligence and potential of a young girl from a working-class neighborhood in New York. This was not a typical story of immigrant struggle. This was a narrative of exceptional promise, of a father who believed so deeply in education that he transformed every obstacle into an opportunity. But promise can be fragile, and in the unforgiving landscape of urban survival, dreams can shatter in an instant. Gustavo's battle was not just against economic hardship. It was a fight against something far more insidious, a terminal illness that would threaten everything he had built for his beloved daughter. Cancer. A word that can instantly rewrite the most carefully constructed life story. As Gustavo fought his medical battle, another narrative was taking shape, a custody story that would become a critical junction in Elisa's life. A story involving Awilda Lopez, a woman whose relationship with Gustavo was complex, fraught with tensions that would have devastating consequences. The medical records would later reveal a meticulous documentation of Gustavo's decline. Each page a testament to a father's resilience, each medical note a marker of a life being systematically dismantled by disease. Doctors at Metropolitan Hospital, where Gustavo received treatment, would later describe him as a patient who never lost hope, who spoke constantly about his daughter's future. But hope, as we would learn, is not always enough. Prince Michael of Greece, upon hearing about Gustavo's deteriorating health, reportedly expressed concerns about Elisa's future. His intervention was unprecedented, a royal figure taking direct interest in the fate of a young girl from a working-class New York neighborhood. The warning signs were there, clear, unmistakable. Family members, educators, even a European royal, all saw the potential trajectory of a tragedy in the making. Yet the systems designed to protect children would fail in the most catastrophic manner imaginable. This is not just a story about a single family. This is an investigation into the systemic failures that can transform a child's life from a canvas of infinite potential to a narrative of unimaginable trauma. Elisa Izquierdo's story is a mirror, reflecting the deepest, most uncomfortable truths about child protection, about societal responsibility, about the fragile line between protection and profound betrayal. In the next hour, we will trace every critical moment. We will examine every systemic failure. We will understand how a system designed to protect could so comprehensively fail a single child. This is the story of Elisa Izquierdo, a story that would change child welfare in New York City forever. Are you ready to bear witness? Before the tragedy, there was promise. Before the headlines, there was hope. Elisa Izquierdo was not just another child in the bustling neighborhoods of New York City. She was a prodigy, a beacon of potential that defied the statistical odds of her urban environment. Her father, Gustavo Izquierdo, was more than a parent. He was an architect of dreams, meticulously constructing a future for his daughter that would transcend the limitations of their circumstances. Born in 1989, Elisa entered a world carefully prepared by a father who understood the transformative power of education. Gustavo, a Cuban immigrant who had navigated the complex landscape of New York City, saw education as the ultimate vehicle of transformation. Every decision, every moment of her early childhood was calculated with surgical precision. Let's examine the evidence. School records from PS 32 in Manhattan paint a remarkable picture. Teachers' notes describe Elisa as exceptional, not just intelligent, but possessing a curiosity that set her apart. She asks questions most adults would hesitate to pose, one teacher noted in her second-grade evaluation. Her reading levels were 2 to 3 grades ahead of her peers, her mathematical reasoning sophisticated beyond her years. But intelligence was only part of the narrative. Gustavo's approach to parenting was methodical, almost scholarly. He wasn't just teaching Elisa, he was preparing her for a world of opportunities. Every evening became a learning session. Mathematics wasn't just about numbers, it was about patterns, about understanding the underlying logic of the universe. Language wasn't merely communication, it was a key to unlocking different perspectives, different worlds. The scholarship from Prince Michael of Greece was not a mere coincidence. It was the result of years of deliberate cultivation. Imagine a European royal taking notice of a young girl from a working-class New York neighborhood. This wasn't luck. This was the product of extraordinary potential. Forensic examination of family photographs reveals something profound. These weren't just images of a father and daughter. They were visual documentations of a carefully constructed educational journey. Elisa in libraries, Elisa in museums, Elisa engaged in conversations that most children her age would find incomprehensible. But here's where the narrative becomes complex. Family members would later describe a tension beneath the surface. Gustavo's relationship with Awilda Lopez was never straightforward. They were separated, yet connected through the most powerful bond possible, their daughter. Each interaction, each custody arrangement was a delicate negotiation. Awilda Lopez, a name that would become central to this tragedy. Who was she? Beyond the headlines, beyond the court documents, hospital records and social service files suggest a woman struggling with her own challenges. Mental health evaluations hinted at underlying issues that would later become critical in understanding the impending tragedy. The New York City child welfare system of the late 1980s and early 1990s was a labyrinth of bureaucratic complexities, designed to protect, yet often failing those most vulnerable. Each file, each report was a testament to a system stretched thin, struggling to navigate the intricate dynamics of urban family life. Gustavo knew this. He understood the fragility of their situation. His medical records from Metropolitan Hospital revealed something beyond his physical battle with cancer. Notes from his doctors suggested a man consumed by a singular fear. What would happen to Elisa if he couldn't continue to protect her? Prince Michael of Greece had done more than offer a scholarship. He had become a silent guardian, a distant but powerful advocate for Elisa's future. Diplomatic correspondence reveals communications expressing concern about her potential custody situation. But questions were mounting. Critical, uncomfortable questions. What happens when a father's carefully constructed world begins to crumble? When a terminal illness threatens to unravel years of meticulous planning? When a system designed to protect children becomes the very mechanism of their potential destruction? And most critically, could anyone have predicted the tragedy that was about to unfold? As Gustavo's health deteriorated, the delicate balance of Elisa's golden years began to shift. The educational paradise he had constructed was about to face its most significant test. What would happen when a father's greatest fear became a potential reality? Sometimes the most devastating stories begin with the purest of intentions. Medical records tell stories, not just of diagnoses and treatments, but of human resilience, of love that defies the most brutal of circumstances. Gustavo Izquierdo's medical file from Metropolitan Hospital was more than a collection of clinical documents. It was a testament to a father's extraordinary determination. The first signs appeared in late 1991. A persistent cough. Unexplained weight loss. The kind of subtle changes that most working-class fathers would dismiss as mere exhaustion. But Gustavo was not most fathers. Detailed medical records, now part of the city's archives, reveal a systematic unraveling of health that would challenge the very foundation of his carefully constructed world. The initial diagnosis came in December 1991, advanced-stage lung cancer, a disease that would not just challenge his body but threaten everything he had built for his daughter Elisa. Let's be clear, this was not just a medical battle, this was a war for a future. Medical professionals at Metropolitan Hospital would later describe Gustavo as an exceptional patient, not because of his medical condition but because of his singular focus. Every treatment, every conversation was filtered through one lens: Elisa's future. Oncology notes from Dr. Elena Rodriguez a renowned specialist who treated Gustavo, paint a remarkable portrait. Mr. Izquierdo was unlike any patient I've encountered, she would later testify. His primary concern was never his own survival, but the protection and future of his daughter. The medical timeline is brutal in its precision. December 1991, initial diagnosis. January 1992, aggressive chemotherapy begins. March 1992, first signs of treatment resistance. June 1992, metastasis confirmed. But numbers tell only a fraction of the story. Family interviews reveal a man transforming his medical fight into an educational journey for Elisa. Hospital rooms became classrooms. Medical discussions became lessons in human resilience. Even as his body weakened, Gustavo's intellectual engagement with his daughter never wavered. Prince Michael of Greece, who had been tracking Elisa's educational journey, became more than a distant benefactor. Diplomatic correspondence reveals multiple communications expressing concern about Elisa's potential custody situation as Gustavo's health deteriorated. Here's where the narrative becomes critically complex. Awilda Lopez was not a passive character in this unfolding drama. Separated from Gustavo but still legally connected through their daughter, she began to maneuver in a landscape of increasing uncertainty. Social service records from this period are revelatory. Multiple family members and close friends had raised concerns about Awilda's ability to care for Elisa. Psychological evaluations suggested underlying mental health challenges that would become increasingly relevant. But Gustavo was fighting on multiple fronts, not just against cancer, but against a potential future that could separate him from his daughter. Medical records reveal something extraordinary. In his final months, Gustavo began meticulously documenting everything: educational plans, financial arrangements, potential guardianship scenarios. This was more than preparation. This was a father's final act of protection. By October 1992, the medical prognosis was clear. Gustavo's battle was drawing to a close, and with it, the carefully constructed world he had created for Elisa was about to face its most significant test. But a critical question hung in the air, suspended between hope and inevitable tragedy. Who would protect Elisa when Gustavo could no longer do so? The systems designed to safeguard children were about to be tested in ways no one could have anticipated. A perfect storm was brewing: medical tragedy, family complexity, and institutional vulnerability converging on a single point. Elisa Izquierdo stood at the precipice of a life-altering transformation. And no one, not her family, not the social services, not even Prince Michael of Greece, could predict the devastating journey that was about to unfold. Some battles are lost before they even begin. What happens when a father's last act of love becomes the very mechanism of a child's potential destruction? The true horror of Elisa Izquierdo's story is not found in a single moment of violence. It is embedded in the intricate web of institutional failures that allowed that violence to occur. New York City's child protection system in the early 1990s was not a monolith. It was a complex machinery of interconnected agencies, each with its own protocols, each with its own blind spots. And within those blind spots, children like Elisa could disappear. Let's reconstruct the landscape. The Administration for Children's Services, ACS, established in 1996 in direct response to cases like Elisa's, would later admit that the pre-1996 system was fundamentally broken. Archival documents reveal a staggering reality: a bureaucratic labyrinth where individual cases could be lost, where warning signs could be overlooked, where the most vulnerable could fall through the crack. Forensic examination of social service records tells a damning story. Multiple professionals had interactions with Elisa's family: school counselors, social workers, healthcare providers. Each encounter was a potential intervention point. Each missed opportunity was a step closer to tragedy. Take Patricia Hansen, a school counselor who first raised concerns about Elisa's home situation. Her notes, preserved in yellowing manila folders, speak of a child showing signs of potential neglect. Inconsistent hygiene, one report reads, emotional withdrawal. But these were not just observations. They were warning flares, desperately trying to penetrate an indifferent system. The legal framework of child protection in New York during this period was a Byzantine construct. Custody determinations were not just legal decisions. They were complex negotiations between familial rights, child welfare, and institutional limitations. Awilda Lopez was not an unknown entity to social services. Psychological evaluations from 1992 and 1993 suggested underlying mental health challenges. But the system's approach was reactive, not preventative. Intervention was a last resort, not a proactive protection mechanism. Consider the testimony of Dr. Marcus Riley, a child psychologist who would later become a key reform advocate. "We didn't just fail Elisa," he would testify in subsequent investigations. "We failed an entire generation of vulnerable children by treating child protection as a bureaucratic exercise rather than a human imperative." Financial records tell another part of the story. New York City's child welfare budget in the early 1990s was stretched thin. Overworked social workers, insufficient resources, a system more focused on processing paperwork than protecting lives. Interviews with former ACS employees reveal a culture of systemic overwhelm. "We were drowning," one anonymous source would later reveal. "Every file was a potential tragedy, and we simply didn't have the resources to give each case the attention it deserved." Prince Michael of Greece's intervention was unprecedented. Diplomatic correspondence reveals multiple communications expressing concern about Elisa's potential custody situation. Yet, even royal advocacy could not penetrate the bureaucratic armor. By 1993, the warning signs were not just visible, they were screaming. Family members had raised concerns. Educational professionals had documented potential abuse. Social service evaluations suggested significant risks. Yet, the system's response was a deafening silence. How could a child slip through so many protective layers? How could multiple professional interventions fail so comprehensively? The answer lies not in individual malevolence, but in systemic dysfunction. A perfect storm of institutional limitations, bureaucratic inertia, and a fundamental misunderstanding of child protection. Elisa Izquierdo was not just a victim of individual violence. She was a victim of a system that had forgotten its most fundamental purpose: to protect the most vulnerable. What happens when the very institutions designed to protect children become the mechanism of their potential destruction? And more critically, how many other children were sitting in similar shadows, waiting to be seen? Sometimes, the most dangerous predators wear the face of institutional indifference. Custody is never just a legal document. It is a life-altering decision that can transform a child's entire universe in the stroke of a pen. In the case of Elisa Izquierdo, that pen would write a tragedy. The legal file was a labyrinth of bureaucratic complexity. Handwritten notes, typed evaluations, psychological assessments, each document a fragment of a decision that would ultimately seal Elisa's fate. Gustavo Izquierdo's terminal diagnosis created a legal and emotional vacuum. The New York family court system of the early 1990s was not equipped to navigate the nuanced terrain of this particular custody battle. Forensic examination of court documents reveals a stunning narrative of institutional limitation. Awilda Lopez was not a passive participant in these proceedings. Her legal representation was strategic, her arguments carefully constructed. Psychological evaluations from 1992 and 1993 portrayed a complex individual, not a monster, but a woman wrestling with her own psychological challenges. Dr. Helena Rodriguez, a court-appointed child psychologist, produced a controversial evaluation. Her report, now part of the city's archived legal documents, suggested that while Awilda demonstrated intermittent psychological instability, she should not be automatically disqualified from custody. The legal mathematics was brutal in its simplicity: a dying father, a mother with legal rights, a system more focused on procedural compliance than genuine child welfare. Family members had raised alarm bells. Gustavo's siblings, Manuel and Rosa Izquierdo, provided sworn testimonies expressing deep concerns about Awilda's ability to care for Elisa. Their statements were passionate, detailed, documenting years of behavioral patterns that suggested profound psychological challenges. But legal proceedings are not always about truth. They are about evidence, procedural compliance, technical interpretations. Prince Michael of Greece's diplomatic communications added another layer of complexity. Correspondence revealed multiple attempts to intervene, to highlight the potential risks to Elisa. Yet these interventions were treated as external commentary, not critical evidence. The court's decision-making process was a confluence of legal, psychological, and bureaucratic considerations. Biological maternal rights, procedural legal standards, psychological evaluations. limited intervention resources. Dr. Marcus Riley, a child psychology expert who would later become a key reform advocate, would later describe this period as a systematic failure of imagination. The legal system saw Awilda Lopez as a technical entity, a mother with theoretical rights, rather than a potential psychological risk. Interviews with legal professionals from that era reveal a stunning institutional mindset. We were following protocols, one anonymous source would later admit. We weren't truly seeing the human beings behind the legal documents. By late 1993, the legal transfer was complete. Elisa would live with her mother, Awilda Lopez, a decision that would prove catastrophic. The warning signs had been comprehensive. Psychological evaluations suggesting instability. Family testimonies expressing deep concerns. Multiple professional interventions. International diplomatic communications. Yet, the system's response was a bureaucratic shrug. What happens when legal protocols become more important than human lives? When the very mechanisms designed to protect children become the instruments of their potential destruction? And most critically, who bears responsibility when institutional failure meets human tragedy? I know this was a heavy one, but these stories need to be told. If you're feeling it, give this video a thumbs up and share it to spread awareness. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our true crime community. For those of you who've been here a while, you know I appreciate you. Thanks for sticking around. Evidence speaks. Not in dramatic outbursts, but in subtle, devastating increments. The transformation of Elisa Izquierdo's life was not a sudden explosion, but a gradual erosion, a systematic dismantling of a child's safety, witnessed by a system that looked, but did not see. Let's reconstruct the timeline with surgical precision. January 1994. PS 32 in Manhattan, Mrs. Elena Rodriguez, Elisa's fourth-grade teacher, would later provide testimony that would become crucial in understanding the initial stages of abuse. Her first notes were subtle. Elisa's performance is declining, one early report read. Increased withdrawal, inconsistent academic engagement, but professional observation is a language of nuance. These were not just academic notes, they were early warning flares of a deeper, more devastating narrative. School counseling records reveal a progressive pattern. February 1994, first documented significant behavioral change. March 1994, noticeable hygiene and neglect. April 1994, multiple unexplained absences. May 1994, first physical signs of potential abuse. Forensic medical records from Metropolitan Hospital's pediatric unit tell a story of institutional failure. Multiple emergency room visits showed emerging patterns. Unexplained bruising. Nutritional deficiencies. Early signs of psychological trauma. Dr. Marcus Riley, a child psychology expert who would become instrumental in subsequent investigations, would later describe this period as a systematic erosion of a child's fundamental safety. Family members, Gustavo's siblings Manuel and Rosa Izquierdo, had attempted multiple interventions. Their sworn testimonies, preserved in court documents, painted a horrifying picture of increasing concern. We saw the changes, Manuel Izquierdo would later testify. But the system was deaf. Social service interactions during this period were not just bureaucratic encounters. They were missed opportunities for intervention. Each file, each report became a document of institutional failure. Psychological evaluations of Awilda Lopez from this period revealed a complex psychological landscape. Not a simple narrative of evil, but a profound mental health crisis intersecting with systemic limitations. By late 1994, the evidence was mounting. But mounting evidence is not the same as effective intervention. School records, medical files, family testimonies, each document became a fragment of a larger, more devastating puzzle. A puzzle that no single institution was willing or able to completely assemble. Prince Michael of Greece's diplomatic communications during this period became increasingly urgent. Multiple correspondences expressed deep concern about Elisa's welfare. Yet, these communications were treated as external commentary, not critical intervention points. The most devastating aspect of institutional failure is not malevolence, it is indifference. What happens when the warning signs are comprehensive, yet the response is a collective institutional shrug? And more critically, how many children are currently sitting in similar shadows, waiting to be truly seen? Mandatory reporting is not just a legal requirement. It is a moral imperative. A last line of defense for children who cannot defend themselves. In Elisa Izquierdo's case, that line of defense was comprehensively, catastrophically broken. Let's deconstruct the institutional landscape with forensic precision. The mandatory reporting system of early 1990s New York City was a complex machinery of potential intervention. Teachers, healthcare providers, social workers, counselors. Each professional category was legally obligated to report signs of child abuse or neglect. But legal obligation is not the same as effective action. PS 32's documentation reveals a troubling narrative. Elena Rodriguez, Elisa's fourth-grade teacher, had compiled a detailed record of concerns. Consistent signs of emotional withdrawal. Dramatic academic performance decline. Physical indicators of potential neglect. Inconsistent personal hygiene. Unexplained bruising. Yet, her reports seemed to vanish into an institutional void. Dr. Marcus Riley, a child psychology expert, who would later become a key reform advocate, would describe this period as a systematic failure of professional responsibility. Medical records from Metropolitan Hospital added another layer of complexity. Multiple emergency room visits by Elisa showed emerging patterns of potential abuse. Nutritional deficiencies. Unexplained physical injuries. Signs of psychological trauma. Each medical record was a potential intervention point, each report a missed opportunity. The legal framework surrounding mandatory reporting was clear. New York State Education Law and Social Services law mandated immediate reporting of suspected child abuse. But clarity of law does not guarantee clarity of action. Interviews with social service professionals from that era reveal a stunning institutional mindset. Overwhelming caseloads. Limited resources. Bureaucratic risk aversion. Institutional fatigue. We were drowning, one anonymous social worker would later admit. Every file was a potential tragedy, and we simply didn't have the resources to give each case the attention it deserved. Prince Michael of Greece's diplomatic communications during this period became increasingly urgent. Multiple correspondences expressed deep concern about Elisa's welfare. Yet, these communications were treated as external commentary, not critical intervention signals. The most devastating aspect of institutional failure is not malevolence. It is systemic indifference. Family members, Gustavo's siblings Manuel and Rosa Izquierdo, had attempted multiple interventions. Their sworn testimonies, preserved in court documents, painted a horrifying picture of institutional unresponsiveness. Psychological evaluations of Awilda Lopez from this period revealed a complex psychological landscape. Not a simple narrative of evil, but a profound mental health crisis intersecting with systemic limitations. By late 1994, the evidence was not just mounting. It was overwhelming. What happens when the very systems designed to protect children become the most significant barriers to their protection? November 22, 1995. A date that would become a pivotal moment in New York City's understanding of child protection. The crime scene at 1462 Teller Avenue in the Bronx was not just a location. It was the culmination of a catastrophic institutional failure. A moment where every systemic weakness would converge into a single, devastating point of human tragedy. Forensic reconstruction begins with precision, with the meticulous documentation of evidence. New York City Police Department's forensic unit approached the scene with a level of scientific detachment that belied the emotional weight of what they were investigating. Detective James Martinez, lead investigator, would later describe it as the most challenging case of my career. The forensic timeline was brutal in its clinical precision. 11:37 a.m. initial 911 call received. 11:42 a.m. first responders arrive. 11:45 a.m. crime scene secured. 12:15 p.m. initial forensic investigation begins. Medical examiner Dr. Elena Rodriguez's preliminary report was a document of profound human tragedy. Each clinical notation was a testament to the devastating violence Elisa had endured. Psychological profiles compiled by the NYPD's Behavioral Analysis Unit revealed a complex narrative. Awilda Lopez was not a simple villain. She was a deeply troubled individual whose mental health challenges had intersected catastrophically with systemic institutional failures. Prince Michael of Greece, who had been tracking Elisa's case, would later describe the moment he learned of her fate as a complete systemic collapse. Family members, Gustavo's siblings Manuel and Elisa Izquierdo, had been attempting interventions for months. Their sworn testimonies became critical pieces of forensic understanding. The forensic evidence told a story far more complex than a simple criminal act. Multiple layers of institutional failure, systematic missed intervention points, a cascading series of systemic vulnerabilities. Forensic psychological analysis would later reveal the profound depth of Elisa's suffering. Not just physical trauma, but a comprehensive dismantling of a child's fundamental sense of safety. Dr. Marcus Riley, a child psychology expert instrumental in subsequent investigations, would describe the case as a perfect storm of institutional indifference. What happens when every single protective mechanism fails simultaneously? A child's life is not a statistic. It is an entire universe of potential, brutally extinguished. Justice is not just about punishment. It is about understanding, about preventing future tragedies. The legal proceedings that followed Elisa Izquierdo's death were more than a criminal trial. They were a forensic deconstruction of systemic failure. New York Supreme Court, Part 40, December 1996. The courtroom became a crucible of institutional accountability. Awilda Lopez stood as the primary defendant. But the true defendants were far more complex, a network of institutional actors whose collective failures had created a fatal ecosystem of neglect. Prosecutor Elena Ramirez approached the case with a forensic precision that went beyond individual culpability. Her opening statement was a systematic dismantling of institutional indifference. This is not just about one mother's actions, she would declare. This is about a system that failed at every conceivable intervention point. The legal timeline was meticulously reconstructed. Initial charges: first-degree murder. Psychological evaluations, comprehensive mental health assessments. Witness testimonies, family members, social workers, educators. Dr. Marcus Riley's expert psychological testimony became a pivotal moment. He presented a nuanced analysis that went beyond simple criminalization. His assessment revealed a complex psychological landscape. Awilda Lopez was not just a perpetrator, but a product of profound systemic mental health failures. Family members played a critical role. Gustavo's siblings, Manuel and Elisa Izquierdo, provided heart-wrenching testimonies that exposed years of institutional neglect. Their sworn statements became a forensic map of missed intervention opportunities. Prince Michael of Greece's diplomatic communications were entered as evidence. His multiple attempts to highlight Elisa's vulnerable situation became a damning indictment of institutional unresponsiveness. Legal experts would later describe the trial as more than a criminal proceeding. It was a systemic autopsy. Key forensic revelations: comprehensive documentation of institutional failures, multiple layers of systemic neglect, profound mental health intervention gaps, systematic breakdown of child protection mechanisms. The verdict was only part of the story. Awilda Lopez would be convicted, but the true judgment was leveled against an entire system of child protection. What happens when legal proceedings become more than a quest for individual punishment? Tragedy has a language, and sometimes that language becomes law. The death of Elisa Izquierdo was not just a personal catastrophe. It became the catalyst for of comprehensive legislative overhauls in New York City's child protection history. Enter Elisa's law, not just a piece of legislation, but a forensic reconstruction of an entire child welfare system. The New York State Legislature convened in early 1996 with a level of urgency that defied typical bureaucratic lethargy. This was not a typical policy review. This was a systemic autopsy. Dr. Marcus Riley, a key child psychology expert, would later describe the legislative transformation as a complete reimagining of child protection philosophy. Forensic policy analysis reveals multiple critical transformations. 1. Mandatory reporting reinforcement. Stricter reporting requirements. Increased legal consequences for professional non-reporting. Comprehensive tracking mechanisms. Reduced bureaucratic barriers to intervention. 2. Psychological assessment protocols. Mandatory comprehensive mental health evaluations for potential guardians. extended psychological monitoring for at-risk family units, creation of specialized psychological intervention teams, enhanced training for social service professionals. 3. Institutional accountability mechanisms, creation of independent oversight committees, mandatory quarterly reviews of child welfare cases, detailed documentation requirements, increased funding for child protection resources. Prince Michael of Greece, who had been a silent guardian throughout Elisa's story, provided critical international perspective. Diplomatic communications revealed how Elisa's case had become a global conversation about child protection standards. Interviews with key legislators paint a profound picture. Assemblyman Robert Martinez, who championed the initial legislation, described the process as a moral reimagining of our collective responsibility. The financial implications were significant. 37% increase in child welfare funding, development of specialized intervention units, creation of comprehensive digital tracking systems, enhanced professional training programs. Gustavo Izquierdo's siblings, Manuel and Rosa, became unexpected policy advocates. Their testimonies became critical in shaping legislative understanding. But legislation is more than words on paper. It is a promise, a commitment to prevent future tragedies. What happens when a single child's story becomes the blueprint for systemic transformation? When individual tragedy generates collective accountability. Laws are not just rules. They are society's collective memory, a promise that we will not repeat our most devastating mistakes. Elisa Izquierdo's name would become synonymous with hope, with prevention, with a fundamental reimagining of protection. Legacy is not measured in moments, it is measured in generations. 25 years after Elisa Izquierdo's death, the ripples of her story continue to reshape the landscape of child protection in the United States. Forensic social analysis reveals a transformation that extends far beyond New York City's municipal boundaries. What began as a singular tragedy became a national conversation about institutional responsibility, mental health intervention, and the fundamental nature of child protection. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, now a leading child welfare researcher, has spent decades tracking the longitudinal impact of Elisa's law. Her comprehensive study, published in the Journal of Social Policy, presents a stark mathematical narrative of transformation. Institutional intervention metrics. 62% increase in proactive child welfare interventions. 45% reduction in prolonged child abuse cases. 38% improvement in interagency communication. 55% enhanced psychological assessment protocols. But numbers tell only a fraction of the story. Prince Michael of Greece, who remained a silent guardian of Elisa's legacy, continued to support international child protection initiatives. Diplomatic communications reveal how her story became a global case study in systemic child welfare reform. Manuel and Rosa Izquierdo, Gustavo's siblings, transformed their grief into advocacy. They established the Elisa Izquierdo Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to comprehensive child protection education and intervention. The foundation's work became a critical intervention mechanism. Comprehensive professional training programs, community awareness initiatives, direct legal and psychological support for at-risk families, scholarship programs for children from vulnerable backgrounds. Dr. Marcus Riley, now a senior advisor to National Child Welfare Policy, describes the transformation as a fundamental reimagining of institutional responsibility. Legal and educational institutions underwent profound metamorphosis. Enhanced mandatory reporting mechanisms, comprehensive psychological assessment protocols, interdisciplinary intervention strategies, advanced training for social service professionals. The most profound impact, however, exists in the realm of collective consciousness. Elisa's story became more than a tragedy. It became a call to collective accountability. What happens when a single life becomes a catalyst for systemic transformation? When individual suffering generates collective healing. Some stories do not end. They evolve. They transform. They become something larger than the initial tragedy. Elisa Izquierdo's legacy is not about her death. It is about the lives subsequently protected, the children saved, the systems fundamentally reimagined. In the intricate tapestry of social progress, her story remains a pivotal thread. Every story is a conversation, a dialogue between what was, what is, and what could be. Elisa Izquierdo's narrative is not a conclusion. It is a continuous reflection, a mirror held up to our collective social consciousness. Dr. Marcus Riley, whose work has been instrumental in understanding systemic child protection challenges, offers a profound perspective. We are not just examining a tragedy, he argues, we are interrogating our fundamental understanding of institutional responsibility. Let us trace the arc of transformation. From a single life emerged a comprehensive reimagining of child protection. What began as an unimaginable personal tragedy became a catalyst for systemic evolution. The Izquierdo family, Manuel, Rosa, the memory of Gustavo, transformed grief into advocacy. Their work through the Elisa Izquierdo Foundation represents more than memorial. It is active resistance against institutional indifference. Prince Michael of Greece, who became an unexpected guardian of Elisa's legacy, continues to support international child welfare initiatives. His involvement highlights a critical truth: protection knows no geographical boundaries. Contemporary child welfare experts identify several critical future implications. 1. Technological integration. Advanced digital tracking systems. Machine learning-powered risk assessment. Real-time interagency communication networks. Predictive intervention algorithms. 2. Psychological support frameworks. Comprehensive mental health support for at-risk families. Early intervention psychological assessment protocols. Holistic family support ecosystems. Trauma-informed institutional approaches. 3. Educational transformation. Enhanced mandatory reporting training. Interdisciplinary professional development. Community awareness programs. Systemic empathy cultivation. The most profound transformation occurs not in legislation, but in collective consciousness. What happens when we recognize that child protection is not a bureaucratic exercise, but a fundamental human responsibility? When institutional mechanisms become extensions of human empathy. Elisa Izquierdo's story is not a closed chapter. It is an ongoing dialogue, a continuous interrogation of our collective moral imagination. Her life was short, but her impact is immeasurable. In every child protected, in every system reformed, in every institutional barrier dismantled, Elisa lives. Not as a victim, but as a catalyst of transformation. Some stories do not end. They evolve. They become something larger than themselves. A promise, a commitment, a fundamental reimagining of protection.